for joining me in my garden today. I'm Liz Davey and you're watching A Walk in the Garden on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Television. I'm here in my herb garden this morning and we're doing some gardening. It's suddenly spring, at least the last 2 days have been. However, looking at the forecast, we may get a little more in the way of early spring instead of late spring. It is the second week of March, but with temperatures in the 70s, things have started to pop up and the weather's been so nice that you want to stay outside all day. And so I have been outside quite a lot and I've done some preliminary raking of the herb garden, and I'm now ready to start cutting back some of the old herb stalks. And I'm going to just start cutting this one back. This is a lemon balm. And we still have a few leaves blowing in, which will come out a little later. But we can see what's coming up. I removed the annual herbs last fall because they weren't going to come up again. But you can see we have a nice lemon balm and it is starting to come up. I'll be trimming back most of these. This one is, not sure what this one is. This may be an annual one, although it does have some green. We haven't had much winter this year, and certainly many years at this time we still have snow and there's no chance of coming and working in the gardens or starting to cut things back. We want to encourage things and kind of clear out a little bit because they are coming up, but we don't want to overdo it with a lot of fertilizer because we may get some really cold weather. We've had snow here in April and even early May. I don't think we're going to get any this year, but who knows? It's New England. What can you expect? I will not put any fertilizer on, but herbs tend to like a little extra lime. So I'm going to just sprinkle each of the beds with just a very light coating of pelletized lime. You could also do this for your lawn, but I wouldn't add fertilizer quite yet. Certainly raking when you can get out is fine, but just a little lime for many of these herbs is a good thing to do. So I will do that. And again, keep trimming back. I have sage here, and some of it came through pretty well. Usually I lose the variegated sage each year. This year we have some nice shoots on the variegated sage. So hopefully it will continue. Other sages I can trim right back and they will come up, hopefully, and start putting on new foliage from the base. I always buy a couple extra sage plants in case they don't come out that well. And again, just keep taking these up. Here's another lemon balm. This one will probably be dug and shared with someone else. Probably the garden club sale will be the recipient. That takes place in May. But I'm going to point out to myself the things that I want to dig, pot up, and have ready to go to the garden club sale or to share with someone else. I don't need 3 lemon balms in the garden. One will be quite sufficient because I'd like to add some other things as we go along. Other things are coming up. I've got sweet woodruff in the shadier part of the herb garden. That's a very nice May herb usually. It may be end of April herb this year if things keep going. And we have the chives coming up, and they'll be ready to use probably in another month or 6 weeks if things keep going. Again, it's always iffy in the spring. You never know whether it's going to get really cold for a spell again. So you want to keep your mulching materials kind of close at hand. The sorrel is up, garlic chives, also oregano and tarragon have broken through. This is a southern wood, and it too will be trimmed all the way back. It will put out new foliage, and I may even dig this one up and divide it. it's gotten quite large in this area. It still has a little growth on the ends, but it will put up a lot of new growth down in the middle of the plant, and we want to keep it more compact. I note that this one, which is a green southernwood, is popping right out of the soil. So I want to come out here and replant this one a little deeper. It's going to get cut back, but we need to get it deeper into the soil. It's heaved up over the winter as the ground freezes and thaws. So you need to watch for that as you look through the garden and see that the plant's roots are still all underground where they should be. Now let's move over to the perennial garden. I haven't done as much over there. It's time to start cleaning up this perennial garden. I do have some spring bulbs in here, and that's my hurry because they're coming up with a vengeance. So I need to get them cleared out. This is a fall aster, and I'm going to trim that down. And this got a little larger than I thought it would. And I think next year it might even get larger. So I need to move this a little further back in the garden. I've been making a list of things like that I need to do. And that'll be a job for later this month or early next month. In the meantime, I'm just, I'll be going over the garden, trimming, and then raking and disposing of the leaves. I'm going to rake a little spot off here. And my goodness, we're uncovering some things, a few bulbs, and this one, the old foliage just rakes right out of it. It's lamb's ear, and it needs to be divided. There's way too much for this location. There are a few tulips I'm seeing, and some hyacinths in this area, and some crocuses. And back here we have some columbine that is really starting to come up, quite a bit of it. So I will keep raking, and I'll hopefully within the next month get everything raked out and ready. But my immediate thing is taking care of the bulbs. And now is the time to put on the bulb fertilizer. And I'm using some bulb tone. And I want to just scatter a little around each bunch of bulbs, preferably before a rain. And we'll just scatter a little around. And these are hyacinths back here. And back further we have some more tulips and lots of daffodils. These are getting to the point that they probably should be divided after they bloom by digging them out and replanting them in another location and just dividing them up a little bit. We'll see how much they bloom this year. I can see a lot of blooms down in these. Now, daffodils and hyacinths aren't too much trouble as far as critters go because the daffodil bulbs are poison to most of the animals, and they tend to avoid them. Deer and rabbits, that is. However, crocuses, I will use the spray, deer spray on, and definitely tulips. And I have some tulips in the back, which I'll deer spray. And since I have seen a very large rabbit in the backyard, I'm not so sure that the spray I'm using is real effective against the rabbits. So I will also, oops, I got the wrong bag. What I want to add is dried blood, and that was not dried blood. I picked up the wrong bag today, but I will put some dried blood around the crocuses and the tulips, and hopefully that will keep the rabbits at bay a little bit. Last year rabbits were a big problem for me in the vegetable garden, And I'm sure they've invited all their relatives to come for the feast this year. But I'm going to be doing a few things down there to hopefully ruin their party. Down here we have a poppy that's starting to grow, a few tulips in this area that will get a little of the deer spray, especially when it gets raked out. I'll find more things as I rake out the leaves and give them a good spray. There's a primrose right here, and I don't think the deer are going to bother it too much, but I'm going to spray it anyway. It has cream color blossoms, and they've already budded. It's early, but that's the kind of year it is. I'm also going to take the rocks and the baskets off some of the lavenders. Lavender's okay down to about 20 degrees. I'm not going to trim it back yet, but I will take the cover off of it and trim it back a little later when I start to see some more new growth on it. I will empty the basket of leaves, but I'll keep the baskets nearby, the lavenders and the chrysanthemums, in case we get a really cold snap. I'm not going to trim back the roses just yet. You can start to see some growth on them. And usually I prune my roses the day that the Red Sox come back to Fenway, which this year is April 2nd. But looking at this growth on the rose, if we continue to have warmer than usual weather, I'll be trimming these a little before April 2nd, probably in another 2 or 3 weeks. It won't make it quite till April. You want to have just a little new growth so that you can see what's live and what isn't. It's time to prune evergreens. If you haven't done so already, it's time to prune anything that blooms in the fall. Spring blooming things, don't prune now or you'll lose all the blooms. But this evergreen needs to be trimmed back, and it will be forming its new growth soon, so we can get that trimmed back. I usually trim these and use the greens for Christmas decorations, but I didn't need quite as many this year as to completely prune the bush. So I'll be pruning this down, and again adding the trimmings to my burn pile. And I want to lower this. It's gotten a little too tall. I should have bought a more dwarf version, which I did not. It's important to try to buy shrubs that fit the area that you want them. And unfortunately, I learned that a little after I planted a few things. So I will keep pruning this back. I've already pruned one of them. I have 2. They're a hemlock, which is a pine that grows in this area. It's a native evergreen, and it's quite successful in this location. It does like a little bit of sun, and the deer do like it, supposedly, although I've never had any problems with deer eating the hemlock, so perhaps they aren't as fond of it as other things in the garden. Now let's move over to the vegetable garden. It's time to prune down the raspberry bushes, especially when I have a pile ready to burn. I will be cutting some of the raspberry bushes to the ground. I have some that are ever bearing and some are that bloom. We have some that bear in the fall and some that bear early in July. And the ones in July I'll just cut back and take out any old stems. And the old stems are, even before growth starts on them, you can see that this is an old stem. It's already borne fruit and it's now kind of dying, so that will be added to the burn pile. The garlic that we planted in October is starting to come up through the mulch, and we're just going to leave the mulch right there on it, and it will be just fine and nothing's going to bother it for a while. I was able to add this structure, and it does have a cover, and it's called a garden cloche. It's basically got a plastic cover that goes over the top and will enable me to start some things a little earlier. And I would like to, I will be planting some spinach in here And I've started some lettuce seedlings inside, and as soon as they sprout, I'll bring those out and put them in, and then put the cover on and open the cover on sunny, warm days and leave it closed on days that are a little cooler or cloudy. The strawberries are under the straw. I'm going to leave the mulch on those for a little while. Again, I'll take the baskets off my perennial plants, but I'll make sure they're close by in case I need to cover them up again. The same with the mulch over here on the parsley. And this is parsley that grew last year from seed. And I've pulled back the mulch for now, and I have left it there so that I can cover it back up if it gets colder. Parsley's quite hardy, and parsley is also what is called a biennial. It has a 2-year life cycle. The first year it sprouts and makes greens, and the second year it comes up again, and you'll be able to pick it very early in the season. Another month I should have parsley that I can pick a little of, and then it goes to seed. So each year I plant parsley, but I should be able to get 2 crops from it. Early in the spring from last year's, and then later in the year from the ones that I'll plant later on. Once it comes up, it usually goes to seed by about June or July, and then I can just pull it and replant the area with something else. You'll see extra fence posts. I am going to fence the entire garden. I have an electric fence around the outside, but I will be inside putting a layer of rabbit wire, hopefully to keep the rabbits out. The garden cloche also hopefully will help keep any rabbits from eating the lettuce. I'm anticipating a lot of rabbits this year, so I do think they will come up, and I need to plan my protection now. The same is true of deer. We have a high wire, and that keeps the deer out of the garden. The deer could very easily jump over the lower wire, but the upper wire, not so much. And usually once they touch it, they decide to stay away. So in open areas, we do have a higher wire that's up, and that serves to keep deer out. So I don't have too much trouble with deer in the vegetable garden. The flower garden, they can get to, but I don't have too many things that they prefer. So by using the deer spray early, hopefully they will find other paths and other places to find their dinner. Now let's head to the back. There's work to do there too. The pots that were filled with evergreens have thawed early this year. Usually they hang on quite a while, but I've cleared out all of the evergreens, and I do have a few ground covers in here, permanent, and there's a hosta planted in this one that usually comes up. Because it's such a large pot, it doesn't freeze all the way, or not enough to kill the plant. I've left the red twig dogwood in the middle of the pot. It'll kind of form a taller thing to stay in there, and then a little later I'll be putting lettuce. I'll add some compost to the top. The soil kind of sinks over the winter. I'll add a layer of compost on the top of this pot, and then in another 3 or 4 weeks, when the pansies are available at the garden center, I'll add pansies and lettuce starts. We'll have a very early crop of lettuce from here in my pots, and it also looks decorative if you get the red and green and various ruffles of lettuce. They make a nice spring filler before it's time to put in the summer annuals. Continuing to clean back here. This whole area is filled with Crocus tomasianus, which is often called Tommies, and they're a very early crocus, and they tend to perennialize. They reseed all over. I was very worried when I saw the chipmunks digging them up, and then I realized not only did the chipmunks dig them up, they bury them all over the place. So they spread them, help spread them. I have a lot of those, and we have hellebores in bloom. The hellebores are very early, very hardy. They'll even last through a snow. But what we want to do now is take off the old leaves, especially the ones that are really decrepit looking. And again, I will be lightly raking or blowing this area out. But I will take off these leaves. Hellebores come in a variety of colors. The ones I have are mostly pink, and they too tend to perennialize in this area in that they go to seed and spread. And this plant is poison. If you have children or pets that eat plants, you may want to pass this one by, because the foliage is toxic, so we want to get rid of it. Maybe not in the compost pile. Probably put this in a bag and dispose of it. You can see the pink blossoms. The blossoms on this variety tend to face downward. That's one disadvantage. Some of the newer cultivars actually do have heads up, and that would be nice. However, I have plenty of these. And by taking off the foliage now, it kind of highlights the blooms. And new foliage, as soon as the blooms come up, the new foliage will follow shortly. So we'll have plenty of new foliage on these. And I have, again, most of them are pink. As they come up, they're various shades. They evidently hybridize between themselves, and so we'll just take those off. And I have been raking out a bit in some areas. This area I have pretty much raked out as much as I'm going to. And you can see the hellebores. This one's a little darker pink. And some are a little lighter. This one's a little lighter. So they do vary, and we have plenty of snowdrops. This started out with a group of 6 snowdrops, and they too have started to move out and perennialize, and I'm finding them here and there all over the yard as I do these little crocuses. This hellebore is a different variety, and it has a green bloom. All ready for St. Patrick's Day, I guess. But the bloom on this one is green, and it tends to put up more new foliage a little earlier. But I will continue cutting back the foliage on this and then raking out the bed. There's only so much time, and there's a lot to be done in the spring. So I just work at it a little bit at a time, weather permitting, and keep going with it. My big job in the pond right now is fishing out leaves. I've left the heater in the pond. This is always a fun job, and every time the wind blows, I try to come out and get as many leaves as I can out. I could put the net back on, but I usually don't in the spring. I'm not quite ready to set up the pond with the waterfall and the filtration system. It still could freeze. And in fact, had a skim of ice on it as little as a week ago. But I'll fish out the leaves. And we don't need to feed the fish yet either. It's not warm enough. Fish don't need any food until the temperature of the water is over 50. And I do have a pond thermometer, a water thermometer, which I will affix to this wood. I'll fish out a few more leaves too. And I'm going to tie this in. And we're going to start keeping track of the temperature of the water. Once it gets over 50 degrees, pretty steadily, then we can start feeding the fish with some spring and winter food, which is a different protein content than that I would use in hot weather. I have 6 fish. You may or may not be able to see them. It's kind of murky in there. It will clear up once we start with the filtration. It's time to order supplies for the pond. I need a new pack of supplies, enzyme product to help clear the water, and I also need some new tubing. The tubing goes after a year or so, and you need to replace it. and any other parts that need to be replaced of the filtration system. We need to work on that in the next couple weeks so that we can get it going. Probably in April, we can start filtering the water. I use a mechanical filter and then biological filter as well. The mechanical filter just basically pulls the sediment out of the water, and the biological helps clear the water by precipitating the vegetative matter so that it can be pulled out of the water. The fish are swimming around slowly. They'll start moving a little faster as it gets a little warmer. I've had a few frogs out, and last night for the first time I heard the spring peepers. I thought, wow, this is early. Second week in February, and then I looked back at the book. I usually keep track of this and have for probably the last 20 years, and I came to realize that the 10th of March is just about average. So the peepers last night were right on time. They will come and go. I won't hear them every night if it's cold, but we have wetland behind us, and there are plenty of the little frogs that make the peeping noise that signals spring to me, at least. My house I open during the day. It gets pretty warm in there. It will go up to 100 degrees with the sun. The far window is glass or plexiglass, and so it warms up quite a bit when the sun shines on it. So I do ventilate it. I won't be putting plants out here for another month. They'll have to stay inside. Again, I have crocuses here and there that have come up. Now these are not the early crocus. These are the regular Crocus vernus, and they are, again, a little bit early, but spring is here, evidently. So we can have little bunches of these wherever the chipmunks have planted them. I've given up. I do plant them here and there, but I know that they won't stay necessarily. The chipmunks will move them to a new location later in the spring. I used to chase them away. Now I just kind of let them do their own thing with them. I've put out my plastic heron. I'm not really big on plastic lawn ornaments, but this one serves a purpose. I will move him around the pond as the summer goes on. Maybe once a week he'll be in a new location. And this is because I had a problem with a heron who ate all my fish one year. I have since put a tile in the pond, a flue tile, so the fish can have a hiding place that the bird can't get. But he scarfed down about 8-9 fish several years ago. So I read up on how to protect your pond, and rather than having it covered in netting all year, I decided to get a fake heron. It's the size and shape of a real one and colored like a real one, and supposedly the heron flying over will see him and realize that he has this territory and they will not invade it. That's why I keep moving him, because if he stays in the same place, they get wise to my trick. Last year it worked really well, so we'll see how well it works this year. These fish have been here now for 2 years, almost 3 years, and we'll see if it works again this year to keep the heron from eating the fish. Once I get a lot of plants in here, and once the trees get a lot of leaves, then he doesn't see them as well. But where it is early spring, they're pretty visible from the sky in their bright orange coloration. So I'll keep my heron nearby and see if he keeps the real one away. With the windows and bricks, this little area heats up really fast, and so the tulips and the little daffodils in here are already in bloom. The crocuses are pretty much gone. You can see the remains of them. I do need to write down that I need to plant a few more things. I have an area in here that doesn't have much, so I need to put that on my list for next fall so that I can plant this area with a few more things. I've planted things that will mature fairly early so that I can come in and plant annuals early. If I planted a lot of large tulips that bloom in May, it would be a long time before the foliage browned and I could plant something. These are the little early species tulips. They're short and they tend to have striped foliage, kind of reddish stripes on them, and they will bloom early. and be out of here before it's time to plant annuals around Memorial Day or a little before. So I want to keep it low and so that we can open our windows, and early so that I can get them finished before I want to plant other things in this area. Now let's go inside, and there's more gardening to do inside. All right, it's time to start some more seeds inside. I've been growing cuttings all winter, and I have plenty of them to be put out in my pots outside and around here and there as fillers. They're annual plants, and we took the cuttings last fall, and now I'm going to set up some seeding units. And the various seeding units come different ways. I've wet this wicking fabric, and I'm going to put it inside the container, which is a reservoir that holds water. And on top of that, I'm going to put a cell unit. And this has cells in it, plant cells. And then I'm going to use the germinating soil and fill the cells. This is the same soil that I used to fill the milk jugs that I planted the perennial seeds that I put outside. And those have not started yet. They'll be a little while before we start to see growth out there. But these are things that take a little longer, and I want to get a nice head start on them. I'm going to do a vegetable and a flower today in different containers. And undoubtedly make a mess along the way. I'm filling these right up and patting it down pretty well. And I'm planting Impatience in this. I found Impatience are very easy to grow from seed. And if you buy them, they can be reasonably expensive. But you can certainly plant a lot of them from seed. And I cannot use the glove to divide these tiny seeds. These came in a small bag inside another bag inside another bag. And this is a Tango Mix Impatience. Each year I usually buy one packet of seeds, but then I also save the seeds from the prior plants. But a packet of Impatience tends to be quite small. And they're tiny seeds. They require a bit of patience to put them into the pot, and again, the gloves aren't going to do. You can see that the bag of seeds only has maybe 24, and that's what I have. And I'm going to put one seed in each of the units, at most 2 if we have extra. And we do have a few extra. So give me 24 plants. And I have a few extra, so we can add a couple extra seeds here and there. And then I'm going to pat them down carefully. And I won't add any soil over the top. With the tiny seeds, you really don't need to. They'll find their way down. The next step will be to put a plastic dome on the top, and then I'll put these under my plant lights and fill the reservoir with water. There's a little spot for filling it, and I'll keep the reservoir filled up to the base of the unit, and that will water the soil underneath. I won't water these from the top until they've been transplanted into another unit. Let's see where we want to put those, just on the edge, I guess. And then I'm going to do another one, and this one is going to be for some green or for some peppers, green peppers. And I have an extra sheet here. Put over there. And again, wrap the wicking fabric around it. And the idea is to keep this wicking fabric wet. And add soil. I'll be doing tomatoes this way later. Peppers, tomatoes, also tomatillos. The broccoli, the cabbage, Brussels sprouts have been planted outside in the milk jugs. And they will come up as the weather permits. It saves space under my lights to do some of them outside. And let's see, we have a couple different kinds of peppers here. Thought I had another kind. Let me check. No. I guess we'll plant just the piecework. I think I have some North Star peppers at some point, but not right here. So I'll just plant my 6 pieceworks at this point, and then find the North Stars to plant later. I'm trying to use pepper plants that are designed for the New England area. Unfortunately, peppers take quite a long season, and they like a lot of heat. So having them designed for our climate is helpful. So I've done 6, and those I put a little bit deeper. If you consider the size of the seed, you want to cover the seed by about twice its size. So these are, maybe a 1/16 of an inch, so I want about 2/16 of an inch over the top. And then I'll plant the other 6 a little later. And I'm going to mark these both with a piece of masking tape and a Sharpie. And I'm going to say front piecework pepper. And then I'll mark the other end when I plant the other 6. And these will be Tango Impatience. And in my book, I will write the date that I planted them. And I put the label on the front of the cell pack rather than on the front of the water container, because if I want to turn them around, I won't lose the marking. One year I put it on the front of the water reservoir and didn't know what I had inside as they came up. So it's important to mark just the cell pack instead of the water reservoir as well. I've planted some other seeds too, and I've planted lettuce, and this is the lettuce that's going to go out into the garden cloche that I purchased recently, and it's already starting to sprout. So in another week or so, that'll be ready to be moved out to the garden cloche if the weather holds. And again, this is the season. March is kind of a if month because you don't know what's going to happen weather-wise. But I've got it labeled lettuce, and one of them is red and one is green, and that'll be apparent fairly soon. The other thing I've planted is some grass, and this is labeled cat grass, and if you have a cat, you're probably familiar with it, and it too is starting to sprout. And this is something I want to use inside. I always like to have a little container of it. I don't have a cat, but it looks very nice with a few Easter eggs in it. And we're about a month from Easter, so by the time we get to Easter, I'll have a nice little planting of grass in this container. And these two containers I'll just set by the window because I'm not going to try to grow them on to huge plants. And I want to keep them fairly short as we go along. The next thing I want to do is build a planter. I need green things. I like to have some green plants here. And I've got a pot, and I've purchased some herb plants. These will go outdoors later, but right now it's nice to have some inside. And so I have sage and a parsley. And a rosemary, and a thyme. And if you're old enough, why, you probably remember a song by that parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. And so that's what I'm planting. I can use these in my spring cooking. And again, I can set it outside on my patio table on nice days. And I'm going to fill in around these plants. They will not be staying here forever. And we'll fill in around them. And we'll water it in well a little later. I also have a primrose, and I'm going to put that also in. This one's rather dry, so we'll be sure to water this one well. Gives it a little color. It's not edible, but it will give us a little color. There are some buds in here that are yet to come up, and it does need some water. The primrose will be planted outside after it finishes blooming, and the primroses that I have outside all came from plants that I planted inside for a while in the spring, and had them in the house, enjoyed them inside, and then moved them outdoors. To come up the next year. They'll make nice foliage in the summer and then bloom next spring. I've got a variety of colors. I don't think I have a yellow, so that's why I got a yellow this year to add to my little primrose collection. So we have an herb planter. This can be used as a centerpiece on a table if you wish. And we'll give it a little water. In the case of the primrose, quite a bit. It dried out today. It's sitting on a saucer, so the saucer will catch any overflow. And I'll be sure to keep these other things watered too. This that we planted gets a dome, and it will go on my shelf under plant lights. One more thing I want to do, and one of the things that plagues houseplants is aphids. And I don't know where they come from, but in the spring they tend to come out with a vengeance. First nice days, the sun comes out and comes in the windows, and you have aphids. So I've found this online, and it seems to be working. I don't like to use a lot of spray on things. And it's Vaseline, and it's on a yellow Solo cup. Now, It has to be yellow. It's the yellow that attracts them. But then they get stuck in the Vaseline. So this is a mechanical trap, basically, for aphids. And I'll just rub it all over the cup. And then well, let's find a plant to put it in. And we'll set it in this one for now. But in a house plant that has a problem, I can just set it on top, and you'll see in another day or so, it will have aphids on it. Then you can wipe it off and re-grease it and catch some more. So it has been very helpful. My water plants particularly are prone to collecting aphids about this time of year, probably from the soil that they're planted in. Maybe they fly in. I have no idea where they come from, but they tend to show up about now. And I think this is going to take care of the problem. So if you look at my houseplants, you'll see cups every so often on sticks, and it is catching the aphids. I prefer methods that don't use chemicals. So that's one more thing to try if you have insects on your plants. A couple other plants just to show. I can't resist buying a fuchsia, and I have trouble keeping them alive. I need to do a little reading on that and see what the trick is. But I enjoy having them as a decoration in the spring. It seems like when spring comes, I really want to have something in bloom in the house, and a fuchsia fills the bill. This one is one I keep year-round, and I'm going to use that on our table today, a little later. It's a shamrock, and it is March. It's St. Patrick's season, and this is an Oxalis. Is the name of the plant. It is a shamrock-shaped leaf. This one is a red one. They come in green as well, and they have a little white flower, and it happens to be in bloom right now. There are little white flowers in here. They're very small, not real significant, but it's the foliage, and it's very nice to have during the St. Patrick's Day season. Now, I'm going to go and wash up, and then I'll meet you in the kitchen, and we'll cook a few things. It's March. And March means St. Patrick's Day, but it also means March Madness if you're an NCAA basketball fan, which I am, and we will be watching a lot of basketball, also celebrating St. Patrick's Day, and just spring in general. And the days are sometimes cool, sometimes hot, perfect for a little Irish pub food. Maybe not authentic, but this is my take on an Irish pub menu. Some of the things I've done before, and some are kind of new. And I'm going to start out by making some corned beef and cabbage calzone. Well, there's a mixed thing. Several different cultures there, and I'm going to grind and some caraway seeds. A teaspoon of caraway seed is going to get ground here in the mortar and pestle. And I also am going to do some cookies later, and the spice for those, caraway and anise seeds, were also ground in my little mortar and pestle. If you have a spice grinder, you could use that. I don't happen to have a spice grinder, and I'm too lazy to clean my coffee grinder to put spices in it. So I'm going to just put these in the fry pan and let them toast a little bit. And it's going to take a little bit of time to heat up. I've already heated my oven to 400 degrees. And I'll start to smell these toasting shortly. You just want to slightly grind them. We're going to have all the flavors of a Reuben sandwich in these, pretty much. But it's going to be in a little different form. Next, I'm going to add half a chopped red onion, sizzling going here, and 6 ounces of chopped deli corned beef. You could, if you have cooked a corned beef, you could also use pieces of that which have been cut up. And I'm just going to cook these together in the nonstick fry pan for a few minutes. Maybe about 5 minutes with the caraway. I'm just going to brown it up a little bit and cook the onions. If you don't have a nonstick skillet, you might want to add a little bit of oil to this, a little olive oil. If you use corned beef that you've already cooked, that has a little more fat, it would probably supply enough fat. This is pretty lean, and that's all right. I just want to get the onion cooked a bit. The next thing I'm going to add is a package of 3-color deli coleslaw mix. No chopping. And then we want to cook this for 5 to 7 minutes. It will wilt, and that's the plan. Here, we've cooked this for about 5 to 7 minutes, and it's wilted down pretty well. And I'm going to let that sit a minute and come over here and make the dough for it. And what I've made is a black bread dough, and this is a recipe, I found it online, and it's called Steakhouse Black Bread. And Steakhouse Black Bread is what's the little loaves of bread that you get in some of the steakhouses. And it's a really easy recipe. It includes some wheat flour and some rye flour and some cocoa powder to make it nice and dark, a little molasses. And now I'm rolling it out thin on my countertop. And this is going to take a little work. But I do want it thin because it will puff up a bit in the oven. The recipe originally calls for pizza dough, a package of refrigerated pizza dough, which is about 15 ounces. So I just weighed out 15 ounces of this bread dough, so that I would have about the same size. And they would like me to roll this to about 16 inches, which means I have a couple more to go. I may not make it. I use a ruler in the kitchen. I have a metal ruler that goes in the dishwasher, stainless steel. And it works very well for cooking. And we can get a little more this way. And a little more up this way and into this corner a little bit. Not quite square, but I think we can work with it. And we're getting around almost 16. The ruler is a little bigger than that. And then I'm going to cut it into 4 pieces, and I'm using kitchen scissors to do that. And then I'll bring my filling over here, and we'll put some in each of the calzones. See if I can fit it on here. We'll move one of these over. There we are. And I'm going to put a scoop of the filling in the center. And then pull it up and fasten it shut. And seal the ends as well. And I'll do this with all 4 packages and put them on a parchment lined baking sheet. And again, stretch this up to cover. And pinch it shut. This is an easy dough to work with. It was an easy dough to make. I just put everything in my mixer and beat it for about 5 minutes with the dough hook. It also has coffee in the dough. It starts with a strong cup of coffee, 1.5 cups of coffee, as the liquid in the bread dough. Something a little different. Gives it a little extra flavor. And again, we'll pull it up and fasten it. Fold those under a bit. And one more. And we have some extra filling. But I also have extra dough, so we'll make a few more for the freezer. And there they are, our little Irish calzones, and I'm going to put those in the oven for 15 minutes at 400 degrees. And move this out of the way. And it's time to do another dish. And I'm going to make something called Irish nachos. And I've already prepared the potatoes, and I kept them in a warm oven. And these potatoes were not peeled, they were just thin sliced, and then soaked in water, cold water, for about half an hour. Then dried well, combined with a tablespoon of oil. I think we can go a little faster here. And a little garlic seasoning. Garlic salt would work. I use Mrs. Dash garlic and herb. And we'll just put those in. And so they were baked at 450 for 20 minutes, and then turned and baked for 20 more minutes. I have essentially thick potato chips. And these are going to be our nacho shells. And now the fun begins. I'm going to add some toppings, and then we're going to put it back in the oven for a little bit. And I'm going to add some bacon pieces. I use 2 potatoes. You can use as many potatoes as you wish. And we'll add some green onions. And then cheddar cheese, some aged cheddar. You want some nice flavor in this. And then we can pick these up like nachos and enjoy them. Again, they're booked as Irish pub food. I do not know if they're authentic because I've never been to Ireland or in an Irish pub. So I have no idea if they are indeed an Irish pub food. I'll put a few tomatoes on too for some color. And then we're going to put this back in the oven to get the cheese all melty. And I'll just put these right in with the calzones. The next thing I want to do are some cookies. And these are Celtic Knot cookies. And I found a recipe online and I made a sample and I didn't like them. I didn't like the texture, so I used another recipe, but I flavored it the same. And you'll find several recipes online for these. Celtic Knot cookies are a cookie that's flavored with anise and caraway. I did not care for one of the recipes that I tried online. The cookies were hard as a rock. So I found another recipe and I added the seasoning, the vanilla, the caraway, and the anise seed. And I used the mortar and pestle to grind the anise seed and the caraway seed rather fine. This recipe has some whole wheat flour in it as well for kind of a rustic flavor. The shaping is what it's all about. You could probably use refrigerated cookie dough for sugar cookies, rolled out cookies. Any type of cookie that you'd roll, you could do this with. And I need a little bit of flour, not much. And the idea is to make a knot. And if you look online, you'll find all kinds of Celtic knots. And the word is Celtic, I found. I had thought it might be Celtic after the basketball team, but Celtic is only used, apparently correctly, as a term for the sports teams, not for other things. It is spelled with a C, but pronounced as if it were a K. And to make the knot, it's really pretty simple. You cross over the long strand of dough and then join it on top and make a small point. As such, it is called a Trinity Knot with the 3 arms. And then what I did, and the original recipe that I saw did, is to roll a small amount of dough into a circle and put over the top. And this completes the knot. Now, if you were working with rope, it would be intertwined. And if you wish to work with this and start intertwining things, be my guest. You may, but this works out, and the finished product still looks like a knot. There are many different knots and diagrams that can be done, and you can just make the Trinity knot with the 3 arms that works as well. But it was kind of an interesting idea for St. Patrick's Day, and kind of worked with the rustic theme. It helps to work with dough that's been chilled. And again, cross it over, and then bring the two ends up together. Fasten them, and then make small points on the edge. And a circle in the middle. The next thing I'll do with this is to put it into the freezer, and I'll freeze the dough before it's baked. This helps a cookie hold its shape. If you're baking cookies and you want them to hold their shape, freeze them first, and then while they're still frozen, put them in the oven and cook them for probably a little bit longer than you normally would. These will cook at 350, and they'll cook about 10 to 11 minutes. And we have some that are already finished. Oh, you may want to put on some turbinado sugar. This is raw sugar, basically. And I'll just sprinkle some of that on, either now or before I bake them. Gives them a little sparkle and a little flavor. So that they can go in the freezer, and when they come out, we'll bake those. Our things are finished, and we can bring them to the table. These are our calzones, and I'm going to put those on a serving dish. And we'll put these on a wooden tray for serving. And then we'll get our Irish nachos out. And I've moved the shamrock plant over. It's kind of a centerpiece. And these are our Irish nachos with the cheese nice and melty. And let's cut one of the calzones so you can see the center. These could be cut in pieces if you wanted to serve them as an hors d'oeuvre or small meal. And you have the corned beef and cabbage inside. And I'm going to serve those with Thousand Island dressing. And Thousand Island dressing is made pretty easily at home. It's mayonnaise with a little bit of ketchup and a hard-boiled egg cut up in it, and some pickle relish or green olives chopped up and added to it. There are a lot of stories online on how Thousand Island dressing came to be. You can look those up if you would like. It was kind of put together, I guess, by a chef who forgot to bring the salad dressing and had to make some in a rush. But it has the small pieces in it, and it's very good with the corned beef and cabbage, often served with the Reuben sandwich. With the nachos, I'll serve a little sour cream alongside to put on them as you serve those. And then we have the cookies. And these are the Celtic Knot cookies. And those can be a dessert item. So there's our little pub food. We're missing one thing. If you're going to have pub food, you've got to have a little beer. And I'm going to get out some Guinness. And this is a canned version, which is something new to me. I didn't realize the draft came canned. It has a nitrogen capsule in it, and you're supposed to open it for a while before you serve it. And then that aerates it or does something, and then it's more like a draft beer. So we're ready for some basketball or St. Patrick's Day parade, if you can find one to watch on TV. This year, a lot of them have been canceled, so there probably will be at least one on TV, perhaps even from Ireland. So thank you for joining me for a walk in the garden and a little cooking in the kitchen and some planting of seeds in my garden room. This is NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Station, and I'm Liz Davey, and we'll see you next month when more things will be up and in bloom, and we can plant more things out in the garden.